We're on Talbot Street in Dublin's north inner city. Now, walking around here today, you can hear all kinds of languages. But if you were standing here on this spot on any given Sunday in the mid-19th century, you would have heard singing from the building behind me in a language you're fairly unlikely to hear in this place today, Welsh. What do we know about the Welsh community in Dublin in the 19th century? Well, we know it wasn't very big. There was only a dozen or so Welsh families living here permanently, along with a few dozen men and women working as servants in the houses of the well-to-do. There were students as well. Until the end of the 19th century, there were no universities in Wales, and for many young Welshmen, Trinity College Dublin was an attractive option. Medical care was a pull factor too. For the people of Anglesey, for example, the nearest major hospital was Dublin's Adelaide Hospital. So many sick people made that journey. Others who wanted to travel for whatever reason from North Wales to South Wales found it more efficient to make that journey via Dublin, and they might spend a night or two in the city. But the really big Welsh contingent in Dublin was the transient community of Welsh sailors. They might be working on passenger ships or on ships importing slate from Welsh quarries. At any given moment, the number of Welsh sailors here might be well over 100. Many of them spoke little English, and they struggled to find a church in which they could comfortably worship and hear sermons they understood. Some devout ship captains recognized this problem, and in the early 19th century, on Sunday mornings, they would gather up all the Welsh sailors they could find in the port of Dublin and in the public houses of the city and invite them to prayer meetings on board ship. We know the names of two of these captains, Israel Matthew and John Williams. Things became a bit more organised though in the 1830s. In 1831, a Calvinistic Methodist preacher by the name of William Roberts from Anglesey began to hold services in Welsh in a church on Poolbeg Street that had been home to a Dutch-speaking congregation of Lutherans. Eventually though, with the support of churches in Wales, the foundation stone was laid for a new purpose-built chapel, the building that stands behind me. It opened on Sunday the 11th of November 1838 with an extraordinary festival of preaching. Not just one long sermon, but 5. At 9:30 in the morning, the Reverend Cadwallader Williams preached on a passage from Isaiah. He was followed by another preacher who expounded a passage from Zechariah, then a sermon on a verse from Jeremiah, then one on a verse from John's Gospel, and then finally a sermon on a line from Psalm 25. There was a temperance meeting the following night, addressed by preachers and sea captains, more sermons on the Tuesday and on the Wednesday. The congregations on those opening days numbered about 50, and the registered members resident in Dublin amounted to about 18. There was a Richard Jones of Dawson Street, an Elizabeth Evans of Dominic Street, a Mary Hughes of Harcourt Street, and so on. In the tradition of Welsh nonconformist chapels, this place was given a biblical name, Bethel, meaning the house of God. This house of God was designed specifically to attract sailors though. They were told when they were invited to worship here that they could smoke in this building as much as they wanted, so it's not unfitting that you can buy vapes here today. For those who preferred to chew their tobacco, each pew was kitted out with a spittoon at the end. There was strict separation of the sexes during worship, with men on one side and women on the other. When one young man from Holyhead attempted to take his seat with his female companion on the women's side of the church, a certain Captain Lloyd, a big personality in the congregation here, warned him from the pulpit, "Starboard side, my boy." In any case, the sailors came here in large numbers. One contemporary writer describes seeing 150 Welsh sailors here on a Sunday evening, listening eagerly to the Word of God. One interesting feature of the worshippers here and of the preachers is that they came from a variety of different Protestant denominations, even though the chapel was officially in the tradition of Calvinistic Methodism. There were Congregationalists here, and Baptists, and Wesleyan Methodists, and even Anglicans. One visiting sailor described this place as being the nearest place to heaven of any place I've ever seen, precisely because of this ecumenical atmosphere. Traditions of Protestantism, which had strained relations with one another at home in Wales, found themselves at peace here. As for Catholics, that was a bridge too far at the time, and there was in fact quite a bit of anti-Protestant activism being carried out by Dublin's Catholics at this time in the 19th century. It was not all that uncommon for stones to be thrown through the windows of this chapel during services, and for sermons to be interrupted by tirades of bad language shouted through the chapel door. It's interesting to note, though, that relations with the Catholic community seem to have warmed over time. When repairs were carried out here in 1894, the leaders of the chapel community reported in a Welsh newspaper, "We have received help even from the papists." The small congregation here struggled to support a full-time minister in the early 20th century and eventually had to resort to inviting visiting preachers from Wales each Sunday. That practice too was unsustainable though, and the last Welsh service here was held on the 27th of August 1939. Recently though, a little book came into my possession which was almost certainly used in this chapel. Its title is Llyfr Emynau, the Book of Hymns. It would have been held in the hands of countless servants, students and sailors from Wales as they sang out the praise of God in their native tongue. There's even a precious handwritten note in the back of the book, probably taken down during a sermon. It reads, Ar gyhoeddiadau in bwysicach nach amhaion. Your convictions are more important than your doubts. I can't help imagining the one who wrote this note arriving here in Dublin after a long time on the storm-tossed sea, rejoicing on his return to a safe harbour and listening intently to the preaching of the unchanging Word of God in God's house on Talbot Street.